What are we watching right now, Shannon? What are we watching with the Mariners? The ups, the downs this weekend, more ups than downs? What are we watching right now?
Ooh, we are watching a team, I think, kind of come back to what the pieces are. And a team that, it's not complete. You don't have the pitching right now, obviously. You've seen some players come back to earth, and you've seen one player who has not for 2 months, which I think tells you a lot about where that player is. And I think that this is one of those things. We had Jerry DiPoto on the road trip and just talked to him, where are you right now? When you're looking at your team, where is this in the calendar? And they obviously are in the figuring out part. And a big part of that was because they were in a place where they haven't been for a long time. They brought up all the young pitching, but they hadn't brought up a position player, a prospect, a highly ranked prospect, somebody that, they had penciled in for a long time in a while. And so it was trying to figure out, how do we do that? And a concern there was, we've got to be able to give them the runway that they need. This isn't, somebody that, when you have one of your top prospects, or even your top 10, or even perhaps a little below that, like a Ben Williamson, you want to give them the chance to have all the ups and downs that a rookie has. And they've done that with Ben, and you're finding that he's pulling out of some of the hitting problems that he had a couple of weeks ago with a lot of work. You can't just be sending them back and forth. So it was finding the right time when that player is doing well and when you can get them on the team and keep them in that spot for a while. So that's kind of where they are. They're figuring those things out. And we're getting closer to the point where players are available. And so it's going to be important. Do we need to do something at this spot? I think with a veteran, you kind of know a little bit more. So I think that they're closer to what I think we expected them to be without the pitching right now.
Shannon, I said this off the top of the show, and I don't say it lightly. When Julio's had his meteoric months, it's felt like Nelson Cruz's meteoric months, where it's like, wow, that's just different, and it's explosive, and I just can't wait for his next at bat. What Cal has done now over these 58 games for the first time, I'm going back to 90s Ken Griffey Jr. feelings, where it's like, this isn't supposed to be done, where everybody in the league is looking at it, where Jason Benetti comes into town, my buddy, and all he can talk about is Cal Raleigh and Cal and Cal and Cal and Cal, just like we did about the kid and the kid and the kid in the 90s. What is Cal doing through 58 games?
Well, it's historic for his position, which, stop and think about that. That's absolutely insane. And I think that he has put himself in a spot where he comes up to the plate and you feel good every single time he comes up to the plate. Mm-hmm. And it's an expectation that he can handle. Yeah, I think we saw last night, there's a stat, he's got 4 go-ahead home runs, after the 7th inning right now. I think Edgar had 10 in his career.
And he has them this year?
Yeah.
He has 4 this year.
If I'm reading, I'll check it in.
No, I think that's right. It sounds right.
And I think for his career, he's already got 10, and he's just going to rocket up the Mariners list. And when you're talking Mariners list, you've got not just Hall of Famers on top of that. You've got top-tier Hall of Famers. You have got, once-in-a-lifetime player Hall of Famers there. And he's doing that right now. And for him, there's nothing to it. It's something he can take on. He loves stepping up in those situations. And for him, I think it's been a progression of everything that he has done. You look at it, and it's been 2 months, and we've always looked at him as perhaps being a little streaky offensively. He'll have that big slump. He'll have that time where he's striking out all the time. We really haven't seen that. Maybe a tiny bit with the strikeouts very early in the season, but we haven't seen that.
Do you think he's one of those guys, Brock and I were talking about it earlier, who maybe it helped him to get the contract situation squared away so that it was not hanging over his head for the future, and he could just say, all right, that part of the game is eliminated. I just get to go focus 100% on what I'm doing. Because to come out like this after signing the big deal, it's not unique. Other players have done it, but it's really cool, and it's probably more rare than anything else.
I don't want to put too much credit on that, because I do think that it really comes down to where he is in his progression and where he is at continuing to develop at the major league level and balance everything that he has to balance. I think it helps that he's got a lot more experience doing that, because he is still defense first. his priority first is still the defense and those pitchers. So I think that and being able to handle everything is a big part of it, and the experience, and he's smart. I think he almost gets like double exposure than any other hitter because he sees everything from the other side too, and he's smart and he knows how to, how they're going to pitch him and think like a pitcher, I think, when he steps into the box. But I do think that he is somebody that is very structured in his work, and so to have that out of the way, and I still go back to thinking that he went through an entire spring training doing that.
Right.
And that did not derail him. An entire spring training. It would be so easy. I mean, I think it would have been more likely he comes out of the gates and is lesser because he had so much going on in spring training. So I think for him, in that he structures everything to choose where he wants to be and to know that's where he's going to be. Yes, there is an element of that, but I don't want that to wipe out everything else he's done.
Yeah, we talked about the contract. We talked about the torpedo bats. So maybe we failed to mention the other side of this with Cal is, and speaking of structure and routine, is every week he's spending time with Shanny, Cal Raleigh show.
She's the keeper of the cow.
I mean, is there anything to that? And in all joking
Howdy
aside,
couldn't fix Zanino, but
No, he could
man,
not.
we got it right with Cal.
Mike and I, though, I think I could speak for Mike confidently on this one. That for 14 years, sitting down with Pete Carroll every Monday, we learned a lot about Pete. It's almost the off the record stuff, the behind the scenes stuff that you learn, that much more. I know this is just season 1 of the Cal Raleigh show. You've covered him for, the entirety of his career, though, Shannon, and you do get to spend significant time with him every single week talking to him. Have you learned anything new through that experience?
Wow. Yeah, a little bit. Just full disclaimer, I've been a Cal Raleigh fan since the day that they drafted him. I mean, I just had so much intrigue about the player that he was. Catchers have always been my favorite since I was a little kid growing up. Since I got into the game, you figured out they're the ones that you can talk to, and always said that if you don't have your pitching coach and you don't have your catcher, it's going to be a real tough year. You've got to be able to talk to those two in particular. But then, coming off, I think Zanino was the catcher then, and just seeing, how smart he was and how he grew up in the game because his dad was a scout, to know that you had another player that grew up in the game and he was big, strong, huge catcher and switch hitter, add that to it. I mean, I was really fascinated by the player that he was from the moment he hit the system. And we actually had some updates when he was in Modesto on him. I'm sure they're not remembered, but we did. He was an interesting player. And then to get him in front of us and see him struggle a little bit and work his way through that, and then finally, make the team stick and get to talk to him and see him day in, day out and how he handles his business. It was more than you could have hoped for from anybody, let alone somebody who was brought up in the game, and just how he has always juggled everything that he juggles and how he manages everything. And, I have found out that, the structure, I've known it's important. It's even more important and even more detailed, I think, than I would have thought. And then on the other side, I've also found out that he makes dumb mistakes sometimes, and I love it, just kind of personally. He forgets to pack things every now and then. And, he got stuck in his cowboy boots, his new cowboy boots. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he bought new cowboy boots on one of the road trips.
First mistake.
And couldn't get out of them because he forgot the boot horn.
You need that to get out of your boots?
Brand new boots. You have to break them in. These are real. And he needed the aid of a trainer, I think, at the hotel lobby.
Okay.
You'd never think that of him, because he is so together. And I gave him a hard time on the show about you were not prepared, Cal.
Yeah.
You go on the trip, you might be buying boots, and you didn't bring
Somebody texted this in, by the way, and we got to take a quick break, and then we'll give you everything you need to know, and then spend a lot more time with Shannon here over the course of the hour. Cal's got 6 stolen bases already this year. For all of the talk about the 23 home runs, which lead baseball, it's incredible. He's got as many stolen bases as he had last year. He's only had 7 in his career before this year, and he's got 6 bags. What?
So we actually did a little video about this first or second week we started doing the show. I've kind of challenged him or asked for 10.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted it last year.
10.
I kind of wanted it last year, and he started out hot and then just does. And he won't, and I think that's an indication that he's feeling pretty good right now.
Right.
Don't expect those stolen bases as the summer
I
goes
would
on.
imagine.
He is a catcher, and it's totally
I'm just gonna say,
tongue-in-cheek.
Gonna say this now.
But when you are that big and a catcher, to see him stealing
It's
bases,
unbelievable. I would imagine that over this past weekend with his buddy Ty France in town, there was a little conversation about those 6 stolen bases or so. Shannon's
so.
here all hour long. We'll be right back.